Right, we'll get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Prithvi Das, Executive Director of C2HR, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the latest installment of our HR Learning Series. Today's topic is focused on how employee burnout has become a pressing issue affecting company cultures everywhere, with the industry's rapidly changing landscape. Today's speakers will help us dive into root causes of burnout and provide strategies for reigniting engagement for managers and employees. We would like today's webinar to be interactive and invite you to post questions and comments in the Q&A box throughout the discussion. SHRM has approved this webinar for 1 CE credit, and the credit code will be emailed to all participants after the event. C2HR is able to offer free, quality educational programs for our members, like today's learning series, thanks to the generous support of our 2024 sponsors, including the Lawrence Advisory. We sincerely appreciate your support. Today's featured speakers are Daisy Auger-Dominguez, author and fractional Chief People Officer, and Tracy Lawrence, the founder and CEO of the Lawrence Advisory. Daisy and Tracy, we can't thank you enough for sharing your insight with us today. I will now turn it over to the two of you.
Great. Thank you, Prithvi. I'm Tracy Lawrence. I'm happy to be here. Daisy, should we just start with a little bit of background on both of us so they know why we're here? So, yeah, as Prithvi mentioned, I'm founder and CEO of the Lawrence Advisory. We're a leadership consulting firm. And I'm also a contributor to Forbes on the topic of leadership strategy. Daisy?
Thank you, Tracy. I know we rhyme, so this is going to be a fun day.
Daisy, Tracy. That's right.
It's absolutely wonderful to be here today from Brooklyn, New York. As Parthavi mentioned, I am currently a fractional Chief People Officer. I have worked in media entertainment for actually the bulk of my career. I've worked in finance, media, and tech. I've worked at Disney, at Viacom, Time Warner, and most recently at Vice Media. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here to talk about the latest piece of work in my career, which was writing the book Burnt Out to Lit Up: How to Reignite the Joy of Leading People.
Well, terrific. So, Daisy, I feel like we're a great kind of our experience kind of, together, we've kind of seen the whole thing, right? So
Yes.
I work as an outside advisor to a lot of organizations. You've actually been in charge of HR at a number of these organizations, and we've seen the changes in the last few years in terms of this topic for burnout. So I thought we'd start by just defining burnout, and you talk a lot about that in your book. So would love to hear you, how do we know when there really is burnout?
And that, Tracy, is the question that I get. I get asked that question, but I also get these moments of connection when I share the title of my book with people, because most folks just kind of feel already burnt out. They're like, that's me. And then I go into describing and a deeper understanding of burnout as I've learned it. And here's what I've learned. Burnout isn't just feeling tired, right? And I think we can assume that all of us feel really tired right now, but it's a deeper crisis of feeling worn out, disconnected, right? A sense of cynicism around you, and far less effective at work. That sense that I can't do anything right, right? It's the combination of these deep feelings. And researchers like Christina Maslach and others have shown that it is that combination in the workplace that truly addresses what burnout is. And one of my biggest learnings in writing this book is that burnout has been classified as a workplace disease since 2019 by the World Health Organization. So this isn't something that I think for a lot of us, there was a sense that this is a post-pandemic phenomenon, if you will. And I do think that there is this collective exhaustion that many of us feel in organizations. But my favorite definition, the most painful one, but I think the one that's most direct is by Kate Donovan, who is the host of the podcast Pride, the Burnout podcast. And I interviewed her for my book, and she defines it as the slow decline of normal functioning in every aspect of your life due to chronic stress. And this definition resonated with me most because I've lived it, right? I've ignored the signs of burnout. I have seen the slow decline only to realize that denying it made it worse.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Thank you. That's a great definition. And I do a fair amount of group coaching work. And I've done it with a lot of the major studios. And through the years, it's sort of like you've seen this gradual change in the way people talk about their relationship with work and,
Yes.
and the experiences that they've had. I mean, when I started out in cable television, in the 90s, there was joy, there was connection with the work. People go into the entertainment industry because they love it, right? They want to work,
Absolutely.
yeah, they
Yes.
want to work in a field that they have passion for. And so even though, my early days in working in television was at MTV networks,
Ah,
and you went there because it was fun,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
You went there,
you wanted to be with creatives. You wanted to
yeah.
be part of what's next.
Exactly. And we might work until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, but it just felt like you're doing it because it's so cool and
Yeah.
you're so engaged.
Mhm.
But certainly in the last 5 years, to your point, since 2019, people talk about their relationship with work in a very different way,
Much so.
right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it comes across in groups. I did recently a group coaching program for mid-level managers. So these are primarily director and VP level.
Mhm.
And I was really stunned at whereas before what I would hear people talk about is, growing or learning to be better leaders. What I heard more often than anything else in that group was a need to protect vulnerable workers, a need to, what can I do with limited resources? Um,
Yes.
Definitely high levels of stress. I
Mhm.
heard I'm running my department with the knowledge that if I move too quickly, it's almost like at times if I get too much done, people will lose their jobs. So
Mm.
I have to run my department in a way that protects people's roles.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So the just the whole way people are looking at their
Mhm.
jobs seems to be changing. And then you also get a sense of this sense of scarcity, like I'm just happy
Yes.
to have this job and what happens to me.
You're so right, Tracy. And I think for many of us, and there's been so much written about this, right? There's for
Yeah.
many of us, the pandemic made us come face to face with our experience at work and in life, right? Like what we wanted out of life, what we wanted out of these precious hours that we have in the day, and and these lives that we know to be long, but during the pandemic, the precariousness of life really made us all think about very differently how we wanted to spend our days. And add to that the fact that most of us work, right? Most of us have to go to organizations. And as you said earlier, many of us go to work because we want to do the things that we can't do by ourselves, right? We want to create with others. I do fundamentally believe we want joy, and creativity and innovation and all the things, whatever it is that jazzes you up. But we also have to put food on the table, right? Like that's,
Yeah.
it's that combination. And during the pandemic, everything just became so much harder, including the practice of work. And a lot of um, frankly, the systemic failures that had already been part of the industry of the workplace, if you will, all of those just they became a lot more painful for many of us and a lot clearer. And I wrote Burnt Out to Lit Up because I've seen how burnout steals the light from even the most passionate colleagues, right? Leaders, managers, individual contributors, those who wake up every day trying to make a difference, trying to do something really special. And I've lived through it. I've seen myself going to workplaces very excited, right? Like those rose-colored glasses, right? And it's just like everything's gonna be amazing. And I've seen the lethargy, right? Like the exhaustion that comes from systems that were just not designed for people like me in mind, for for others, and and challenges with, I think to your point earlier, oh, but I want work to be this way, but work is really this way.
Yes.
And do I have any agency, right? And I talk a lot about, like you, right? I also, do coaching, and in my coaching with leaders, I talk a lot about, like, let's bridge that vision of what we want work to be and what it really is, and let's figure out what our role is in it. And I think for many of us, this is the space that we're in, and there's nothing more debilitating than feeling that you don't have any agency over something that is harming you, or that is just not there for you. And that also leads to burnout, right? And so I wrote this book because I wanted to speak directly to those who are often caught in the crossfires between these high, relentless, and demanding expectations, right? Like the things that are happening because this is just the pace of change now, and also because organizations haven't quite caught up with it, but also the real messy human experiences at work, because not everything is about the process and the system, right? It is about like how humans interact in all of this, and it is in that messy middle that that wonderfulness can come, I believe, that you can find joy, but also that can deplete us and break us down.
Yeah, I love what you said in your book. It was something like, this is a love letter to the modern manager. And because it
Yes.
was like, we see you, right? So one of the things that I hear, well, let me take a step back and just say, our audience today, those listening, are HR professionals primarily,
Yes. My
right? And
people.
yes, exactly. And one of the things that I've really seen is, with all of the rapid changes in the last 5 years or so in the organization, a lot of HR leaders were not trained. They did not have background in how to cope with the issues of today.
Mhm.
And I hear a lot of frustration as I'm working with leaders, with, line managers, about having problems and no place to go to solve them, right?
Oof.
No resources, nothing to really address the fact that these issues even exist.
Mhm.
Because you've got very senior leadership who's focused on the bottom line of the organization, and they're making these changes, mergers and acquisitions, staffing reductions, things like that, for financial reasons.
Yeah.
But who's dealing with the implications of those? And I would imagine that with a new administration coming in next year, you're going to see an increase in M&A activity, bankruptcies, structural changes. So what are the things that today's HR leaders need to arm? What are the, tools, skills that they need to arm themselves with in order to address the coming onslaught of additional changes?
Yeah, I mean, you're laying out what is the sort of existential question for most of us as HR leaders. I part of the reason why I wrote this book is because I wanted to answer the question that I faced so often, and it is like, am I failing at everything as a manager and a leader? Like, is it me? Does anybody else see this? And in the HR space, whether you're a leader or a practitioner, right, you're managing a range of complex challenges, right? You're managing operational tensions, you're managing restructurings, bankruptcies, layoffs, right? The nuances of employee well-being, and and as in an era where wellness has become a lot more normalized, but also, to your point earlier, it was like it wasn't something that we were trained to do really well in mass, right? And it's not just about the policies and the spreadsheets, right? Which is what most people tend to think, right? It's about real people with real stories and real needs. And I've had to learn how to create space for my well-being so that I can care for others. But HR leaders and practitioners often find themselves not only um, needing strategic thinking, but also this profound understanding of human behavior and organizational dynamics, right? And my advice for anyone who is in this space, you know, working with the people who lead the people, right? Because that's what I often say. I was like, we work
Yeah.
with the people who do the work. We work with the people who help the people, right? It's like we have to be direct yet compassionate, right? We need to recognize strengths, but we can't shy away from giving honest feedback about what is necessary. Building trust through transparency profoundly impacts your effectiveness. And that's a space that can be challenging depending on your positional privilege in an organization. And I very much see that. But I think that, there's always this sense that you can only be one thing or the other, right? That you can't be empathetic and highly skilled at your work, that you can't be vulnerable and highly confident in your abilities to do your work, right? Like that, to me, those binaries don't exist. I think as HR leaders and practitioners, we actually create the nexus of these, right? This is the space that we live in, right? When you are in an organizational restructuring mode and thinking about, what needs to be done because the CFO has given you a set of financials that need to be met, right? You can make choices that prioritize long-term sustainability over just short-term relief. You can do that, right?
Yeah.
In these challenging times, when you put the organization's needs first, it's important because you need to make sure that you're maintaining the longevity of an organization that is going to be supporting the financial health and well-being of many other people, right? But it also involves these really difficult trade-offs, and it's in the trade-offs that I find it's where the moral injuries come into place, Tracy, right? It is where we, as practitioners, as subject matter experts, but also as people that are holding space for the care of the humans in the organization, this is where we can struggle, and it can be, quite frankly, the most debilitating part of, I think, our functions as HR leaders, in addition to just the emotional labor that we expend every day. But it is in those trade-offs and decision-making moments where the moral injuries come into place that can chip away at who we want to be and how we want to show up.
Yeah, I love that. And because, yeah, you're saying that there's a business imperative and there's the moral imperative, and they don't have to be, at odds with one another. And I think another factor is just the opportunity for HR leaders is to really step in and say, okay, if we're going to make these cuts, or if we're going to make these changes, what are the operational implications for how we do work? There's
Mhm.
going to be some work that isn't going to get done.
Yeah.
I was talking to a leader recently who's an SVP and at one of the studios, and two other people who were his peers were let go. So now he's expected to do the job of all three.
Oh yeah.
Right? And obviously he's highly stressed. The thing is, you can't do all three of those jobs. So what I see just as an outside consultant often is the lack of dialogue around this issue of what are the priorities, and are we all aligned on the priorities and the workflows, and what can we drop, what can we not do, as opposed to, I think, because again, goes back to people's relationship with work and the scarcity that they're bringing. A lot of times people are hesitant to bring that up because
I
yeah,
was just gonna say that's the challenge, Tracy, that many of us find ourselves in. And and it's very rare that as an HR leader who had to lead many a painful organizational restructuring, particularly in the last couple of years. It was very rare that I would sit in front of a team and deliver the news where people didn't know how to do it better, right? Like where, it's like and I think part of the challenge in many of these decisions is that they happen in places that are disconnected from the day-to-day real work, right?
yes,
And that's the data that doesn't always get translated for a host of reasons: political, economic, social, behavioral, all of those pieces. And in my experience, this is where HR leaders, right? You fight the good fight. You don't always get there, but this is a key role for HR, right? It's being able to translate the business and the people, and including the nature of work, right? It's like, okay, we're going to have to reduce that, and that team. And I was like, okay, well, if you reduce that person who's responsible for the Instagram account, that team, to one person, if that person's ever sick, there's nobody to push that button, to not just to push the button because that sounds trite, but also because that's a contractual obligation that we have, right? And it's like, so we need to figure out where, to your point earlier about like the work that doesn't get done, but also how the work gets done. And that's where we shine, right? That's where we can come in deep partnership with our business partners, right? With that business gravitas, right? That deep communication skills, that strong emotional intelligence, but also always that strong sense of how the business operates and how the, you know, the people that make that business operate, what is necessary so that you can make sound decisions. And I think for many of us, what we found, and in my experience, right, anytime that I see organizations makes these, you know, drastic cuts, it's like, well, that was very ineffective workforce planning to begin with, right? Like that,
Yes.
you're solving for something now that could have been solved a lot sooner. And this is again where HR can play a role. And the positional privilege, for anyone who may be worried about that, I was like, well, what if no one's listening to me? That happens, right?
Yeah.
And this is where, again, this is where your strategic know-how comes in. It's, you know, how do you lean on the intelligence of others and the positional privilege of others to be able to get those important messages to where it needs to get to. I remember when I joined Vice, HR wasn't part of strategic planning initially. And that was the first thing that I changed when I got there, because we couldn't, you know, the way that it worked was like the end of strategic planning for many of us, right? You get the analysis has been made of what the workforce is going to look like the next year, and then HR is handing you know, a paper or you know, a doc where it was like, this is how many roles we need to hire next year, and you know, and this is what the size of the teams need to be. But in those conversations, very rarely is someone saying, to the point that I shared earlier, I was like, well, if we reduce that by this month, I was like, this is the trade-off, right? Is that something? And to your point around alignment, most organizations aren't aligned, right? Most leaders aren't aligned. And it is being able to just at one point, and this is what I would empower my team often, I was like, you may not get the answer you want to get, but I would feel a lot better, and I think you will feel a lot better by you being able to state what is gained and what is lost with these decisions, and then make sure that you're looking at everybody's eyes and everyone's in alignment with that, and right, and that the people who are responsible for this are saying, okay, I'll take that responsibility, right? I've had to make choices that have been hugely imperfect, right, and nearly impossible, but you know, but I'm like, I'll own that for that reason, because I've taken in all of the data. This is where we come in, is being able to not just the what people think the fluffy and human, right? But it's the operationalizing of this work through humans.
Yeah, I think we're really talking about the evolution of the role of HR, really. And what you see right now is a lot of people, particularly the more senior level people who kind of went into HR at a different time, are having to learn on the job what it looks like now, because what you're talking about is definitely a dynamic that I see. You've got kind of senior level department heads and, you know, division presidents and things like that who are very focused on the strategy of the business, but haven't really thought through how it has to happen on a daily basis. And that's the gap that you see within organizations. But I think it could potentially be a really exciting time to become an HR person and be an HR leader. Yeah, because now, to your point, it's a huge miss to not include HR in strat planning and things like that, because, you know, that's when I get brought in a lot of times, is when that ball's been dropped, right? And people haven't.
They should have been here from the beginning, because
Yes.
when you're there from the beginning, and this is where this, you know, I mean, you and I have been doing this for so long, the
Yeah.
word strategic partner, right? Like there's
Business partner, right? That's part of the title.
this is why it
Yeah,
exists.
yeah.
And, you know, and the relegating of like, that's the only thing that HR does, right? It's compensation, it's firing and hiring people, right? Like let's give them all that role. I was like, that's fine. And listen, it's not the you know, our highest and best use all the time, but this is what we're also responsible for doing. But our role fundamentally is to be a strategic partner that can help leaders operationalize the business through people. Like that's our role, right? Our jobs are for making sure that we are enabling a business, an organization, to deliver on their mission and their goals through its people. And that is, to your point, I think it is it is the reason why I do this work, right? I think it is one of the most humbling experiences, but I think it is also an incredible enabler of not just business, but also people, and to be able to work at that nexus. What a joy that is. What an honor that is.
And I think it's a real, I don't know if it's a skill gap or a competency gap or both, but not everyone picks those skills up as they're rising through the ranks in HR. And so you see,
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
I think yes, and I think I mean, I think like as in any field, right? When we're in HR, our responsibility is to know actually every discipline and every factor in an organization.
yeah,
And, I have met marketers that are not good at what they do, right? I have met a lot of folks in different disciplines that's not their strength. But I have also met many HR practitioners who, and I think this is to your point, weren't equipped with the skills to do this work this way, or haven't been given the access and the opportunity to do so, right? They've been relegated to these, sort of just in a box roles that you do. And, and so they haven't been able to build their muscles to do this work. And that's why I think it's such that the responsibility lies in us as HR leaders and as HR managers to ensure that we are creating those moments of access and opportunity for our teams to be able to experience. Sometimes I remember I would have my team members say, I was like, what's the C-suite doing over there? Like, right? Like we're putting all these programs together. Does anybody care? I was like, well, why don't you come to the next meeting so you can actually hear how they speak about it, and so that you can help influence not just me, so that you can help influence, because that's how you learn, because that's how I learned. And I do think that for many of us, we get so worried about the business not wanting to like be overloaded with HR folks, like don't rolling deep with HR. It's like, but if we're going to model, and that's our responsibility, to model leadership and effective management, we have to be able to model that with our teams. And I found that bringing my team and or giving voice to the members of my team in strategic meetings and high level meetings and operational meetings, where folks would be asking me questions, and I would say, you know what, I can answer that, but I'm not the subject matter expert in compensation. That person needs to be here. I'm not the subject matter expert in talent acquisition. That person needs to be here. And that kind of modeling, I remember even some of my I worked more closely with our executive leaders because those were my peers. But sometimes we would be in meetings. It would be like, Daisy, I know you're going to ask me this question, and your team member's already invited to that meeting, right? And I was like, and by that, right now, great, right? Like I'm modeling this, I'm creating that access and that learning in the moment, because that's how most of us learn. And I think that is what a lot of us are missing out in the hybrid work. And I know it's a bad thing to say. I believe in hybrid. I believe in, the 5-day work week for those who are lucky enough to be able to carve out different work schedules is no longer the way. But I do think that it is important to witness and to experience how decisions get made, how problems get solved, how tensions get reduced in person with each other.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think if there's one message for this webinar, it's things are going to continue to change, right?
Yeah.
Probably at even a more accelerated pace. I was just looking at a statistic on the length of the average lifespan of a corporation.
Mm.
In the last maybe 70 years, it has gone from the average corporation lasting about 60 years to less than 20 years now.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that has huge implications for the role of a senior level executive anywhere, and most certainly for the role of human resources, right? And just the nature of the focus and the skill sets that HR leaders have to develop, right? So it's just, kind of good context. I wanted to talk a little bit about, the signs of burnout. What are some of there are signs of burnout that we think of as the most obvious signs, and then there are some that are more overlooked. What's your perspective on, like, when do we see this and how do we know?
Yeah, burnout can show up in small, sometimes subtle ways, right?
Yeah.
Like shifts in attitude or behavior that may initially seem insignificant, right? Like people might start to become cynical, detached, or struggle to stay focused. I remember for me, it was that those team members that were always kind of like chirpy and happy, and all of a sudden like started snapping at people in meetings. I'm like, whoa, like, right, like, and those are right. Those are little signals that you can. Some of us can choose to be like, oh, they're having a bad day. Let me just let it go. But those are those moments where I'm like, well, that can be something that that needs to just some investigation, right? And it's a matter of, hey, Tracy, I just usually don't experience you this way. And I just noticed that you snapped at, your colleague, your best friend at work. I was like, I just want to know, is everything okay? Is there anything that I can help you with? If not, that's totally fine, right? But it is being able to get to those places. And I have never found, whenever I've asked those questions in those moments where something has seemed just a little askew to me, where someone and obviously this is a matter of building relationship with your team members so they feel trust in you. But when someone hasn't been able to say like, you know what, Daisy, I was like, it had nothing to do with that meeting. It had nothing to do with that comment. This is what I'm carrying. Or, as I would have one of my team members, I loved my team members. They were always, this is when you create psychological safety, people will tell you the
They'll
things.
tell you, yeah.
Right. And then, they would be like, Daisy, like, I went into that meeting and I'm already putting out 3 fires and you gave me 2 more and I just lost it. Right. Like, and it's just like, okay, you're absolutely right. Let's look at the configuration of your work and what's happening, and let's figure out what that looks like. I talk about Sunday scaries in my book, right? Because that's surprisingly a common sign that that sense of feeling dread or anxiety that creeps up on Sunday night. And sometimes it's not even on Sunday night, right? It's like the Monday morning or the Tuesday morning or the Wednesday morning where you're just like, I just can't physically get myself out of bed, right? Those are the signs that, start telling you something's not right with you, something's not right with others. I had a team member. This is how I started researching the Sunday scaries. I wasn't aware of the Sunday scaries. I was one of those Xers, right? That just like worked. And I had a team member who once confided that they felt this intense anxiety every Sunday. And it wasn't just about avoiding work. It was this deep exhaustion from the previous week that they just hadn't even been able to replenish over the weekend, right? And recognizing these quieter signals allows us as HR practitioners to step in early, right? Sometimes it's, again, just checking in regularly, actively listening to your team members, and also creating a work culture. Again, we talk about psychological safety, these fancy terms, but it really is about creating a culture where people feel comfortable saying the things, right? Saying what's real without, and this is what you were addressing earlier, right? The fear of, if I'm the squeaky wheel, I'm going to be the next one on the chopping block, right? And it's being able, and this is why in Burnt Out to Lit Up, I offer scripts at the end of each chapter. So like all of my HR leaders, right? Like this is what we do. My team and I would often joke when we would be writing scripts, it's like people forgot how to talk, right? Like, I was like, this is our job. Help them figure out how to communicate. But I also recognize in all of the hundreds and thousands of scripts that I've written, that we've lost intentionality in how we communicate with each other. And I wanted to provide scripts that come from the executive, but also, or the manager, and also from the individual contributor, that allows you to get a little bit of comfort of, okay, I can push back on this. Here's some words to help me figure out how do I do that in a constructive manner, where I can say the thing without it feeling like it's another burden on my manager and on my leader, right? What does that look like? And these healthy team environments, which we are responsible for, right? Everybody is, your managers are. And I was like, but it is part of our role is to help build healthy team environments that of psychological safety, of recognition of your team members and the work that they do, of building trust, which is consistency over time, right? Of making sure when leaders are like, well, nobody trusts me. I was like, well, let me tell you why, right? It is doing that. And then also being able to sit and what most folks still find uncomfortable, but can get into, right? It's like, it's the configuration of your teams, right? Are your roles clear, right? Do you have the right mix of perspectives and expertise in your team, right? Because lack of clarity leads to stress and frustration. So how do we make sure, and all of that, leads to burnout, right? So how do we make sure that there's clarity and I know my job, I know what I'm supposed to contribute, I know what my lanes are, and I know where I can push out a little bit to like get a little bit more excitement and joy in my work, right? But it's also not just the clarity in your role, but is your team aligned purpose and goals, right? So this, if every single member knows what they're doing and they're committed to what the group is responsible for doing and what we contribute to the organization. Because when you misalign on that, that's what leads to disconnection and reduced motivation in folks, right? When people just like, you're just like, oh, I don't know what I do, so who cares, right? And then there's the, how do you execute the work, right?
Yeah.
Are we carrying out our daily work most effectively? I find most of the tensions in organizations and people complaining, I do too much work. I'm like, well, it's like, you know what? We've got 3 people that are doing the same work and they're getting in each other's way. So, like, how do we make sure that we have clear decision making, clear communication, the right collaboration, the right touch points of this work, right? When teams struggle with unclear processes and lack of feedback, ineffective meetings, right? A lack of sense of what they're doing, that leads to burnout, right? So that's,
Yeah.
guess what? That's our job.
Yeah.
We get to dig through that and help managers and leaders be their most effective self so that they, instead of burning out their teams, they can actually lighten their loads and get the best work out of them.
Yeah, no, I love that. And this is where, you add issues of inclusion, issues of, to your point, psychological safety. Everyone needs to be on the same page with what's not going to get done. People need to know that it's okay to say, I can't get this done. A lot of the work that I do with my clients is just kind of letting them know, you say you want to have a more inclusive environment, psychological safety. You have to be ready to hear things that you don't want to hear. You
Oh,
have
yeah.
to be ready to have people say things that you'd rather not exist, but you want an environment where there's that free flow and free exchange of perspectives, and then you all work it out. A lot of times what I see with people I work with is that tendency towards suppression, right? That I can't say that I can't get all this work done because my boss will be mad at me or they'll yell at me or something bad will happen to me. Sometimes the things that people anticipate happening will never happen, but it's what they're carrying around, right? It's
Yes.
about
These
kind of
stories that we
the
tell ourselves.
stories, yeah, and our relationship with authority and all kinds of deep psychological stuff, right? But those things are going to have to be more free flowing in an environment where costs are going to have to come down. We are going to have more dialogues around the difficulties that we all face in this work environment because change is going to continue to happen. The other thing I was thinking of in terms of signs of burnout is just health related issues. I was doing a group coaching program last year, and a woman shared hospitalization, like chronic illness stuff,
Oh, good.
and she was talking about just as in a very matter of fact way about all of these new chronic illnesses, hospitalizations, increased doctor visits, things like this. And I had to stop in the group and I said, look, I really need to say to you that this is not normal. And she kept saying, but I love my job and I'm excited about what we're doing here. This is at one of the studios. And
Yes.
I had to just kind of stop and say, not normal. We
Yeah.
all here in this group need to give you
Mhm.
feedback that you've probably crossed a line and you need to think about what you're doing,
You know,
right?
it's, you say that, Tracy, and it's reminding me of one of the, I released my book about 2 months ago, and I've been talking across all industries. And two of the industries and sectors where I find the highest incidences of burnout are in the nonprofit space, where
Mhm.
folks have far less resources, but also they're so deeply mission driven that they just push themselves to the brink of exhaustion and illness and sickness. And then, then they just can't, your body eventually tells you, right? Your body stops. But it's also the creative spaces because it is that story of this is my dream job, right? Like
Yeah.
I can't, who am I to not feel excited and exhausted? Like I just need to power through this. And then to your point earlier about diversity and inclusion, it is those of us, and I count myself as one of those, right, who are the first in our family, who are the onlys in our teams, right? Who am I when so much has been invested in me, right? And I think of my family and all the sacrifices they made so that I could have the education that I could have, so that I could have the access that I could have, so that I could be in these fancy titles and organizations and working. Who am I to tell people I'm tired, right?
Right.
Right. And so but all of that is also what leads to our physical and emotional depletion. And for me, my burnout signs were certainly behavioral, but it wasn't until my body gave up that I knew that I was burnt out. And it was in me, and I write about this in the book, it was in me seeking my health. And I started project managing my health. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna start working out. I'm gonna go to my pneumologist, he's like, oh, you have asthma, like, and you're over 50, so you're always gonna be sick. I'm like, okay, that's not a good answer, right? I was like, it's going to, and then going to a nutritionist who took my blood test, and she looked at my results, and she's like, oh yeah, look at you, you're for your level, your age span, you should be up here, and your results are down here. And I was like, what does that mean? It was like, you're depleted. And I was like, well, how does that happen? And she just looked at me and she's like, sustained stress.
Right.
Right. And I'm like, oh, like,
That's
so
like low level everyday stress,
yeah,
right?
so like
Like
sustained stress
every day.
caused my body to deteriorate to this level, right? Because it's all the stress that we carry, right? There's also the shame, the stories, all of these pieces like that we carry, and they manifest in our bodies and
Yeah.
in chronic diseases. And that's what happened to me, and I've seen it happen to so many people. And we see it in the workplace. And I see it with HR leaders in particular, burnout impacting them so deeply because, again, we're in the job, right? We're in the role of helping other people. And so we sacrifice our health and to make everybody else happier and healthier, and, to figure out how to get all the things that they need to be okay. And again, it's noble, it's wonderful, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you've got nothing to give to people, guess what? You're not going to make the best decisions for people, which is what we do. You're not going to think as creatively and as innovatively about what people need because you're too exhausted, and you're just not going to be showing up as your best self. So take care of you so that you can do all the things that you want to do really well.
No, I think that makes so much sense. And I think a lot of people go into fields like HR, executive coaching, things like that, because we're givers.
Yeah.
We like to help people. We want people to be happy. And
Mhm.
it can turn on you, those skill sets, those desires to make others happy can really end up causing us a lot of stress. And I fully agree with you with what you're saying about people in nonprofit. I have a client right now that does a lot of kind of social services.
Yeah.
It's an organization that does a lot of social services, and it's almost like an understanding across all 500 employees at this organization that they are going to be burnt out,
Oh
right? Like
gosh.
it's just fully accepted. Uh,
Mhm.
and so I do think that we need to adjust how we're relating to these issues. Let's do one more question. Oh,
Yes.
Parthavi, I was just going to say, I think Parthavi has,
Oh, good.
yeah,
Do we have a question from the audience?
yeah. Parthavi, do you have
Amazing.
questions for us?
It looks like one just popped up. Let me
Oh,
see.
good.
Is there a higher prevalence of burnout occurring with women? And if so, could you speak to the reasons why women may be more vulnerable to burnout?
It's a good
Oh my
question.
goodness. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
that
great
question.
question.
I think it may not surprise those who are here. I wrote this book, as I said, as a love letter to managers, and I also wanted to share the stories and the data on women and women of color in particular, because that's been my experience, and I find that those voices don't often get represented in this work. So the answer is yes, right? Women, people of color, those from underrepresented groups, they often face added pressures that can make burnout more likely. And those groups frequently experience what's known as invisible work. right? When you take on extra responsibilities related to creating a positive environment or managing cultural challenges, or right, the stereotypical perceptions of women that we are the caregivers, we are the ones that take care of everybody, right? Like it's this invisible labor that often goes without recognition or support, right? And I call those not just invisible labor, but I call them invisible burdens. Because you also, in addition to that, navigating bias, microaggressions, right? And that emotional labor. And and in addition to all of that, we're expected to show up, to keep it all together, and to lead with grace as women, even when the world around us is falling apart. And that is really exhausting, right? So there is data, and I write about that in the book, and I share the stories of women and women of color experience that at this level that is just it's just debilitating.
Well, and add on to that, the personal, the extra personal, you talk
Oh,
about
yeah, and this is just work. You're
yeah,
right. So you're
so
not talking about
taking
the
care of
communities.
children. Yeah, you oftentimes, particularly women of color, you've got not just your immediate family, but you've got, aunts, uncles, cousins, all, nieces and nephews that you may also be responsible for, parents. So that's an extra burden that we don't have. I mean, I coached a woman who's a Black woman, and some of the feedback around her was that, she was grouchy some of the times. And as I worked with her, we started peeling back the layers of what
Grouchy.
her life looked like. And like, I'd be pretty grouchy too, and the answer isn't, I think the answer, what her organization, her supervisor was looking for was for her to be more cheery,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Right? The toxic positivity. And what we came up with is like, no, the answer isn't to be nicer and more cheery. The answer is to redesign your life so that there's space for yourself. And if you
Yes.
do that,
Yes.
center
I love
yourself.
that. I love
Nope.
that, and that's very much the message, right?
Yeah.
It's having agency over what you can do, right? And sort of the soft social memes around boundaries, right? I talk a lot
Yes.
about boundaries in the book, right? That's what a healthy boundary is, right? Is being able to speak your truth unfiltered on what you need.
Right.
And you can do it in a constructive way. Most people think a boundary is like, no, I'm not going to do that. I was like, well, no. It's like, no,
Oh,
actually, I'm not the best person to do that, but I'm going to find you the person that can do that, right? Or is that meeting my highest and best use? Or right, do any right? Like, how do we lighten up what we can do? I talk about I quote in the book the actress Annie Gonzalez, who plays the mother in the movie Flaming Hot.
mm,
And I had a chance to go to the premiere here in New York, and she was speaking afterwards, and someone was asking her, how was it to play such a strong female character? Like, where does she draw inspiration? And she said, I just had to look around my community, my
yeah.
tias and my abuelas, and my mom. It's like, for most of us, and she was obviously referring to Latinas, but I think this refers to most women, like most of us have to play this dual role of both being the soft pillow that everybody gets to lie on, but also this oh my gosh, the iron fist that gets everything done around your community and your neighborhood, right? And I remember when she said that, my instant reaction was like, yes, right? Like I was like, I'm that.
You
And
can
then I
relate.
thought,
Yes.
oh my God, but that's so exhausting, right? Like what, like why don't other people get to do that, right?
Yeah.
And that it is that constant duality, right? And it's playing that not just at work and in all of our communities. I talk about, right? Like I've been always seen as the fixer in the jobs that I have. My husband literally calls me Olivia Pope, right? You're like, you just come in, fix all these, right? But the fixer role that I've had is the one that's expected to clean up the messes that are left by others, while also being told to downplay who I am to fit
That's
in.
right. And don't
That
be tired.
cognitive dissonance is painful and exhausting and sucks the life out of most of us.
Right. I think that's right. So, and that's why women are probably significantly more subject to these issues.
Mhm.
Prithvi, are there other questions?
There's one, and to some extent you've answered it, but there might be some more you can share. It goes to, as we continue to see layoffs among industry employers, what can HR do to help alleviate people's stress related to that fear and anxiety and uncertainty?
Oh my gosh, this is so painful.
Ah.
Yeah, I mean, part of what, part of being able to be a trusted HR partner is, um, is not to run away from these difficult conversations, but to engage them with truth and with honesty.
Yeah.
We don't always know, right? What is on the other side of these decisions. But what we can hold certainty on is what can we control, right? What is it that you control in terms of your body of work, in terms of, what needs protecting in your personal life, right? What needs, care for you at the workplace. It's not about this is the time to overwork because everyone's going to see what a great, colleague and, and worker bee you are, and then you're going to work yourself to the ground, right? This is not it. It's about how to work smartly, and how to hold space for the fear and the anxiety. Because sometimes I find that it's the okay, I don't know what I don't know about this, but here's what I can share, right? And then also having moments to what scares you, really trying to understand what scares some people, because sometimes we also in the narratives of our lives, we kind of just we carry these scripts that are shaped by previous experiences or these internalized fears, which sometimes push us to overperform, over control, right? And like just kind of like mess up or even undervalue ourselves. And yeah, and it's those scripts that sometimes lead us into places that we, or behaviors that are really not, how we show up at our best, right? So in these moments, it's when I think and when I talk to my teams and when I encourage my teams to coach their teams to think about how can I show up as my best self, no matter what's being handed to me, right? And so that if I am on that chopping block, I'm going to walk away here with my dignity, knowing that I have done the work that I need to do, and with the protections that I can possibly garner, right? Like, what does that look like? Instead of going into our fear, our flight, right? Our flight or flee, right? Like response, which this is what happens to most of us, right? We feel these internal anxieties and we presume that there is an actual threat. And sometimes there isn't any threat, but
Yeah.
because we think there's a threat, we start behaving like there is a threat and we start showing up in really awful ways. And also cause damage to ourselves and those around us. So it's in these moments where it is our responsibility to be able to try and hold space for those emotions and be able to create that but we need to start with ourselves, right? We can't go into a really tumultuous team meeting, something that we know is going to be like really spicy and heated, right? And go into it after like 3 meetings back to back, and you not being in your best self, right? This is when, I would do this with my team. I was like, we're going to go into this, like, let's spend 10 minutes just like doing some breathing exercises, right?
Yeah.
Let's do 10 minutes to just like talk about what we're afraid of, right? Like name our fears, because we're human. We're carrying this stuff too. Let's name it. And then let's go in there with as much calm, right? And presence of mind so that we can try and hold space for the other people who need that space now. That's the
Yeah,
best I can offer at this moment.
I 100% agree. And I think HR leaders just need to think about the nature of the change in the role, right? So a really effective HR leader in the environment that we are, particularly as you get more senior, in the environment that we're about to go through, is very connected to the business. Like we talked about in the beginning, they have to be very connected to the business. They have to lean into that part. It's the self-management, but it's really understanding the business. And then the other thing I tell people that I work with is, in a time of uncertainty, you need to lean in towards being truthful and credible so that people, right, when people come to you and they want answers, if you don't have answers, you have to just say you don't have the answers.
You don't know what you don't know.
You
Yes.
don't know. But what you want is that they know that you will tell them the truth.
And that comes with confidence, Tracy.
Yeah.
And I think this is what you were coming to or speaking to earlier in terms of
Yeah.
key HR attributes and skill sets, right?
Yes.
I can show up I can show up vulnerably and tell you, it's like, I don't know what's gonna happen, but I have expertise in this space. I have confidence in what I know and what I'm sharing, and I have credibility because I have built trust over time with you. It's like these are the tools that we have to lean on, but you don't lean on them in moments of crisis. You have to build them.
Build them over time.
Right?
Right.
This isn't about like all of a sudden the world's on fire and now I'm going to show up. Right? No, we have to be doing this all along so that when these moments of deep disruption, and we live in a perma crisis, there is crisis every moment of the day, right? I mean, when I worked at Vice, we worked across 20 countries. There was something bad happening in some part of the world at some point of the day, right? And I couldn't, and my team, right? We couldn't be in reactive mode to that all the time. We needed to figure, and there were moments that we had to, right? Because this is just, how life happens, right? But we needed to be able to create those moments of pause and understanding and walk into spaces with that level of clarity and confidence and capability to be able to say the things that need to be said in that moment, right?
Yeah.
This is not about feeding into the frenzy. This is also not about gaslighting people, right? It is about being honest with people, showing up for them, and being able to give them the sense that your expertise and your capability is going to help them get to the other side of this with as much grace and dignity as possible.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we're just about out of time.
Yes.
This has been an amazing discussion. Thank you so much, Daisy.
Likewise.
Thank you, Parthavi, and thank you to all those who have participated in our discussion.
Yes, thank you both, Tracy and Daisy, so much today, sharing your insight. As you said, things are going to continue to change, and knowing how to manage that change for ourselves and for our teams is what's going to be foremost and up, front for everyone. I also want to thank the C2HR community for joining us on our call today. You can see there is a CE credit available, and this is being recorded, so we'll be sharing this on-demand video on the site very soon. So thank you all so much for your time, and I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you all.
Take care, everyone. Bye.